Hello, everybody, and welcome to Deckbuilding Derezzed. I'm your host, Code Marvelous, and today I am joined by Hollis from Bad Publicity and The Winning Agenda.
Hey, what's up, guys? How you guys doing?
So, Hollis, you're another very active content creator in the Netrunner community. Why don't you tell everybody watching at home what you're all about as far as the content's concerned?
Yeah, sure. So I get to be the lucky guy who's a member of two awesome different venues for content for Android Netrunner. The first one, of course, is A&R Bad Publicity. That's an opportunity for myself, Jameson, Miles, as well as Alexander White, Vinegary Mink, I think is his screen name, to discuss different tiers and different levels and aspects of Netrunner gaming. It's a really good outlet. We love what we do and have fun making videos. Then, of course, I'm also a member of the group The Winning Agenda, where it's Wolfie Horig, Jesse Marshall, Brian Holland, as well as myself, and we have we usually have special guests on there as well. And we normally talk about the more competitive aspect of the game, ways to improve your game, things like that. That one is, very, I call it like the most serious thing in Netrunner that I do, because we keep our episodes really, really, really tight, really, really cut short. But I think people like that. I think if, a lot of competitive players looked at that as kind of that, as the go-to podcast, primarily because, they know they can get some information, a like-minded, view of the game, and it's real quick. They can listen to it on their ride home and things like that. So that's what I'm all about. I'm also a fan of this show. I'm a fan of I'm plugged into so much Netrunner content now. As far as like what I enjoy watching, I listen to any and all podcasts that I have an opportunity to do. I watch all videos. I watch your videos. I watch the guys from Metropole Grid. I bet I even gave them a brief shout out one time. I mean, like it's just a lot of fun to see what everyone's doing differently for Netrunner. And major props to you. Major props to everybody that produces content, because sometimes we will spend more time during the week talking about the game than actually playing it.
Yeah, I would say that's 1,000% accurate.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you very much, man. I appreciate you being a fan of the show, and I definitely appreciate you coming on. So today we're going to be talking about a deck that you've been playing for a while now. This is the Hollis edits to a kind of a popular archetype that's been going around for Palana Foods. You want to tell us a little bit about what attracted you to the Palana Foods identity and what kind of the core goal of this deck is?
Yeah, so let me to give credit where credit is due. This list in particular, just starting off, came from sort of an amalgamation between a couple people I've seen online as far as their deck options. I mean, I went in and out of a lot of choices. I'll talk about that as we go through, but just know that I ended up kind of just shifting to the one I preferred as far as my playstyle goes.
Right.
It's Palana Foods. A lot of people are familiar with this already. The goal really here is to build a single server for the most part that's going to be a protected server using Caprice, and play a ton of side games and get lucky. I mean, that's really the best thing that you can do in some of these matchups. The ice is fairly taxing, and this deck makes a lot of money. So as a result, the ice is kind of big. It's taxing, but you can normally afford to res it pretty well, and versus most matchups, I think it's pretty fair. The deck to me is just a blast to play. When you look at your side and you see 30 credits sitting on your board, you're like, wow, I guess I can do anything. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I was about to say, saying that it makes a fair amount of money is like an understatement. Palana Foods makes like a comical amount of money.
Yeah, it's nuts. It's pretty nuts.
And so, for those of you who might not be familiar, Palana Foods is the Jinteki identity that's from this newest cycle. That's 45-15, and the first time each turn that the runner draws a card, gain 1 credit. And there's a really popular runner draw engine right now. What is that called? Wild Cakes.
Oh yeah, that's the one.
That's the one.
That's it.
So against a lot of the top tier runners, you're basically going to be guaranteed to get at least 1 credit per cycle of turns.
Right.
And then, as we'll see, there's other cards that can enhance that.
Exactly.
So,
cool.
Where would you like to start? What cards do you want to start with?
We can always. I like to always start with the agenda. Choices first. I mean, it's a pretty standard deal, right? I mean, the 6 agendas that you'll always see in I think most like Glacier Jinteki decks are pretty much going to be the Global Foods, or not Global Foods, excuse me, the Future Perfect and the Nisei Mark IIs, right? Like though it goes without saying, it's the best 4-2 in the game, pretty much, and it's and the Future Perfect ends up being probably the best, if one of the best 5-3s in the game as well, because it protects itself.
Oh, you mean I have to win rock, paper, scissors to steal this 5-3?
May the odds be ever in your favor. Like,
Yeah.
So I mean, those those are kind of those are always going to be pretty much chosen in a deck like this, unless you're doing some odd fast advanced variant, I guess. The global food is primarily chosen just because it's a super advantageous agenda that gives you 3 points. Your own runner only gets 2, so you add into the fact that your other 3-pointers are fairly safe and more difficult to score. This is just also a fairly interesting agenda that sort of leverages you, giving you the ability to score only 3, where more likely the runner probably has to score 4 or bust their butt to score, harder 3-pointer agendas. So that was pretty much the reason for the inclusion. The corporate sales team, you needed another 2 points, and I think with the most wanted list putting NAPD on, either you cut an influence somewhere and put in the NAPD, or if you want to, you play corporate sales team and have a card that drips in economy over the course of 5 turns, which I think is just also amazing. I mean,
I love this card.
I do too.
I've been playing it in ETF, and it just becomes comical.
Yeah.
Because I'm just like, I guess I'll just make like 2 to 3 credits a turn and just be like, just rolling that money. Because like it's amazing to me how much more potent drip economy is for the corp than it is for the runner. It's unreal.
It's good. Yeah. I mean, I am a fan. I'm a huge fan of this card. I think that if Nisei Mark II wasn't so darn good, I would definitely be playing more of these. But of course, Nisei, it does what it does. It stops runs, and that's what you need. This is a nice support agenda to have in the deck for sure.
Right. And I think one of the most important things that is worth noting about Nisei Mark II is one of the reasons why Nisei Mark II is always going to be a staple is because it synergizes with Sai so incredibly well.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, you ran twice, and on that second run, you finally got through Caprice. Get out and do it again.
Yeah. It ruins
It ruins it, and it gives you usually that extra breathing room you need to survive as Jinteki, which, can do a pretty strong Glacier, but perhaps the ice isn't quite as strong as you would see in an HB.
Right. Yeah, that's sort of the negative, is that Jinteki Ice, and I guess we can go there next. The Jinteki Ice itself is somewhat, it's somewhat lackluster in terms of what you really want to have to be super glaciery. If you take a look at it, starting with just the barriers, even being an additional influence, Eli is still, for the most part, the best barrier to put in your deck. There's quite a bit less Kate now, and the Kate that we are seeing is, I don't even think are they running Lady? I think the Kates I'm seeing now are all doing the Chameleon stuff, right?
Yeah, a lot of them are doing the Chameleon stuff. Really, the people you're seeing running Lady are the Haleys, who are running all the ways to recur them. Yeah.
So even when you look at like barrier options, Lady is still, and I guess that's a good point to also make. Lady is still impactful enough that even now, when Kate's moved past it, it's something like Spags' Pitchfork deck that's primarily being the deck that's using that kind of using that particular breaker. It's still kind of hard to justify a lot of barriers in your deck because they, for the most part, get invalidated. They're not going to be taxing enough. Right. Eli sits in a unique spot where it's the right cost for the right strength, and versus matchups like Dumble Fork, it's definitely going to be more taxing than something like Baco.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, Eli's just strong. If taxing your goal, especially with a Sai at the end of the tunnel, is what you're doing, Eli's always going to be good because the value exchange in there is just so good.
Yep.
So if we go down to code gates, we've got 2 Cricks.
Yep.
Which it's Crick. It does Crick things. It's 6 strength on archives, which is terrible for noise unless the David's out and pretty strong. And if they happen to face check it by some miracle, there's just a tremendous amount of value in Jinteki for pulling something out of the trash, especially an upgrade.
Right. Most definitely.
So we got 2X Enigmas.
Those, if I'm being quite honest here, I would probably be fine swapping like 1X Enigma out for something like a 3rd Crick. Enigma is an early gear check, but given the fact that everyone's using Faust anyway, you can't really I guess you really can't call it a gear check anymore. Right now, the real benefit of Enigma is that you can res it, and if you have nothing that you can recur from the crick, it's not a wasted not a wasted code gate. It's fine. It's an early game ice, and then it pretty much loses that usefulness later in the game. So you got to have cards like that.
Right. And we've got 2x Lotus Field.
Yeah. Yeah. That seemed like very much a no-brainer. I mean, 2 cards for Faust. You can't lower the strength, so it's basically always going to take the 2 cards. They can spoon it, but most Dumble Fork decks are running the 1x spoon, so they either need to use their same old thing, holding the levy in hand, or wait for the levy to get the second spoon back. So 2 Lotus Fields seem right. Another added benefit is that like the card can't die except from a spoon. So you toss this, and whatever server you toss this in, it's lasting until spoon is gone. Sorry, until spoon makes it gone. Excuse me.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. And you're gonna have the money to res it. Like the one of the biggest things for Lotus Field for a long while in the meta is it's only 4 strength, and it costs 5, but like money is just not a problem in this deck.
Yeah.
So you're able to put this in and just be like, yeah, a 5 for a 4 strength is not a big deal for me.
Yeah. Agreed.
And then we've got my favorite neutral piece of ice in the game.
Yeah. So World showed us a lot of cool things, right? World showed us, shout out to Dave Hoyland, that Assassin was definitely a super impactful card. Now, granted, your worst fear when you're playing this card versus something like Dumble Fork is going to be they have a ton of money, right? So you're going to res this, they're going to just pay the trace cost and ignore it, and then they'll fork it. So that's fine. But all things considered, you need cards like this. They are taxing. They tax David counters. 2 David counters is a pretty good value here. They can only ever get through that once. And in general, a Trace 5 and Trace 4 in a meta where most of the runners that are being played right now, the most common runners that are being played right now don't have a link. Because I think, it makes the card a lot better.
Yeah, it's really strong. And when people are caught off guard by this, and we were discussing this earlier, like when you've got Mamba money so they don't think that you can res it.
Right. Oh, man.
The surprise res of this is super impactful.
Yeah, super strong. I love it.
Yeah. All right, so we've got 2 Ichi 2s, so another Bioroid splash. Or not Ichi 2s, Ichi 1s.
Yeah. So this was actually kind of interesting because we'll talk about it more when we get to like the upgrades. For a long time, the deck changed for a bit where instead of the Ichis, I went towards the route of using something like Toll Booth so that I would have more taxing, bigger ice. The issue I was running into with more taxing and larger ice is that it always felt like I was being punished so hard versus Dumble Fork for spending so much money on something that taxes. Assassin was definitely, it's an expensive card, but it felt justified. Whereas Toll Booth, though it taxes for that 3, it always felt like it just wasn't doing enough for like the 8 credits that it was costing.
Okay.
So I switched to the route of instead of using like Toll Booth and kind of not really caring about the baddie play, going with Itchy and also using baddie. And just trying to play that fun game that we played, roughly 6 months ago, where an idea, an option was you could always resin Itchy, baddie, resin Itchy, try to get the trash to program off, and make them suffer additional subroutines. Now, it's unlikely that's as impactful as it was back then, but I think Itchy still is a fairly taxing card that definitely earns its spot. There were only a handful of cards that I really liked there for additional ice, right? Like I said, the Toll Booth was an option. At one point, I think I even entertained Hive. And I only entertained Hive, which sounds nuts, but I only entertained it because I knew that it would be an early game ice that would allow me to kind of apply this super early pressure. Because I could put a Hive and a Caprice down and just throw an agenda in the server and just go. And if they don't get rid of the whole hand, I'm still rolling dice. But if the whole hand isn't gone, maybe I might just get it. And that'll be what lets me just snowball that game. But I dialed it back. I didn't want to go nuts, and I just kept Itchy. It's okay. I will say that it's not necessarily the weakest card in the deck, but I don't dislike it either.
Right. And getting the baddie trash can be super impactful, especially what I have found playing against Palana builds that have the Ichi baddie is that it ruins that turn where we're both at 5. You've got something with 1 advancement on it, and then you're like, yeah, baddie, rock, paper, scissors to see if you can actually get it this turn.
Yeah, pretty much, right? Yeah, that is what it does. And I think that being a Glacier deck and seeing how a lot of these other decks are kind of fast, it's dice you have to roll sometimes. I mean, make a calculated risk, try to put it in your favor, but sometimes you just have to roll those dice and hope they land your way.
Right, and I think Palana also embraces, as opposed to running away from the fact that you will not outmoney a run. Well, you will outmoney a runner, but you're not going to actually be able. There's no consistent card where you can pour money into it and consistently get victory anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So having 40 credits is irrelevant if you don't have some sort of other way to secure an agenda that's sitting in a remote. And that's just the world we live in right now.
Yep.
Like, the Glacier game depends on Psi.
It does. It actually does. You got to do it. Ash is fine, but it's not going to be enough. You got to just say, I'll take a 66% chance.
Right. And that, in my opinion, is largely because, well, I mean, not that Corporate Troubleshooter ever got a ton of play, but cards like Corporate Troubleshooter, where you could really leverage a lot of money into just be like, surprise,
Yeah.
Oh, okay, you pumped it up to like 1 billion strength. Yeah, I guess I'll just clone ship David back. And just,
Yeah.
And just deal with that for 3 credits. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the world we live in. You are correct.
So we got 3 pups, and pups do pup things in Jinteki.
Yep. Yep.
Yep, it's Jinteki pop-up window, but better.
Yeah. You don't gain the credit, but you are taxing them too. So, do it. Just, they'll parasite it, whatever. You paid 1. I mean, it did what it needed to do.
Right, and this is one of the few pieces of ice where it will cost your opponent more than you right from the first time you res it.
Right. Correct.
We've got 2x Swordsman. So we were discussing a deck or many decks earlier that run fouls.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you look at like NEH lists, right? You look at NEH lists, maybe a few Wayland. I've seen it like a sprinkle of it in like a handful of Wayland lists. They run a 1x Swordsman, which is, it's an obvious reason why it's in there. You put it in there because if they're going to do the Faust play, it gear checks the Mimic. I mean, there's not many ways to gear check Dumble Fork, so it's nice to have something that does it. And this is what it does. It says, hey, you've got Faust. That's all nice and good. I've got either my R&D or HQ or my scoring remote, but now Swordsman is there. Do you have the Mimic? If you don't, even if you get past the Mimic, there's a series of really bad things behind it that you probably can't deal with, or will take a clone chip and other means to get through, which is fine. It is there purely as a hate card to hate out and try to hate out Faust, and I think that it is definitely worth those 2 slots. I've killed enough Fausts.
Yeah.
And I mean, even in this meta as Corp, even gaining 1 action from the Faust trash wins the game. Can win the game. So, absolutely. I mean, you play to your outs. That's what you got to do.
I mean, in my NEH deck, if my Swordsman can take out the Faust, that's usually that maybe 1 or 2 turn, like breathing space. That's more than enough for me to get things really going.
Right.
And the other thing is most of the, especially Anarch decks that are running Faust, only have 1 Mimic. So even if they're running the Wild Cakes engine, it's not a huge chance that they're just holding it when it dies.
Right. Something that I was going to say.
Go ahead.
Well, something people don't always realize also is I know that I guess this is probably discussion for like when you talk about Dumble Fork more, but people don't realize sometimes that when you're playing a deck, when Dumble Fork is playing against a Glacier deck, if they're not running E3, which is more common now, but not all of them are doing it. If you're not running E3, you will end up taxing cards that you do not want to tax because you will rationalize. Making that successful run is what is necessary. Maybe you got 3 counters on medium, and that's what you got to do. Because losing that Mimic right now rationalizes looking at 3 or 4 cards. And you're probably right. However, when that Mimic goes away, cards like Swordsman get even more powerful.
Right.
I love this card. I'm happy that it exists. Thank you. We need this to be in the meta. We need this to exist.
And it's also by one of my favorite illustrators, Adam S. Doyle.
Ah, he did Wall of Static. Very cool.
Yeah, Wall of Static, Medium, like basically all of my favorite abstract cards are done by him. All right. So, very briefly, let's go to assets. We've got
Yeah.
Jackson Howard to do Jesus Jackson Howard stuff.
He saves us.
He does save us,
Save us.
or he's our hero. According to the April Fool's joke on Jinteki.net.
Wow. Okay.
Well, did you
Oh,
play
okay.
on April Fool's?
I actually didn't, but I did see Wayland.me. That's the fullest extent of what I saw. What else?
So
did
they
do?
changed a bunch of sound effects and gave like a bunch of like wrestling voiceovers
Oh my
to
God.
like rezzing certain cards. So when you res Jackson Howard, it would go "Our hero." Dun dun.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah, but yeah. So the
tough.
important asset in this deck is Palana Agroplex.
Yep. Whew. Alrighty. So I hope the internet doesn't hate me. So this is the thing. I like 3x of this also, but this is the problem I was running into. So the card is super useful, but usually what I end up doing is I end up installing over it. At some point in the game, I end up installing over it because I'm in my process of scoring, and I have to score 5 threes to win.
Right.
So I don't want to still be overdrawing, thinning out my deck while trying to actively score agendas. Because now at the end of my turn, let's say I go ahead, advance. At the end of my turn, I'm trashing down 2 cards as opposed to trashing down the 6th. I'm trashing the 6th and 7th. Now, granted, that doesn't mean every card is useful, but it does force some tough decisions on occasion.
Right.
So instead, what I said was, let me take away 1. I can only play 1 to begin with. Let me just take away 1. My odds of seeing it kind of early, we're taking a chance here. The card's very good. It gives you a pretty decent value as far as credits goes, but I don't want to see 3. I also don't want to have to trash better cards in my hand because I'm overdrawing because I can't override this and things like that. So 2 just seemed like the right number. And as the more I play, 2 still feels more correct.
Okay, and I 100% agree with that, and it's important. I'm just going to explain the interaction. So when the runner draws on their turn, whether they have a draw engine or they've got whatever they're using or just hard drawing, you're going to get a credit there. And then this makes it so that, a point where the runner isn't usually drawing cards your turn, they now get a Mando draw, and you get a Mando draw of 2. So it's making it so that you're pretty likely to get the Palana credit both players' turns from that point on until you overwrite it or it gets trashed, which is pretty good.
Pretty good.
And in the early game, it helps get you to the things you need pretty effectively. It's also got the magic ratio of 1 res to 5 trash cost, which is just delicious.
Gorgeous and delicious and wonderful and
Yeah, it's really good.
if only Jackson was 5 to trash.
Well, and I love the theme of this because it's really cheap for a corp to get a food program online because who doesn't want food? And man, you got to pay to trash that because nobody wants you as the runner to get rid of like free food or inexpensive food for everyone.
I dig it.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah. So we've got 3 Caprice Nisei, Jinteki's other savior.
Yeah, you could probably go down to 1 of. I'm kidding. Yeah,
No,
I mean,
no. I was like, what?
no, yeah, I mean, it's the Glacier card, right? It's the Glacier Protection card. So you put 3x in. That's what you do.
Yeah,
You need it.
And it does the side game thing where you just say, no, all that money you spent was for nothing. Please leave.
Yep.
We got Crisium Grid. I can't imagine what this is for.
Oh man, have you? So there's an Anarch that doesn't use wild cakes all the time, but it does a lot of siphons. I don't know if we've seen that one or not. So this was mostly an Apox Max counter. I'm terrified of that deck. Why? Because every time I think I have a handle on it, I get wrecked by it. Every time I think I'm fine, it wrecks me. So
it's a really strong deck.
it is, and once that APOC happens, rip. Like, good luck coming back because they're probably going to run away. They could very well run away with the game right there. So Crisium Grid, I usually just throw in whatever server I need to just to make sure they don't get the APOC as soon as possible. So
Yeah, 100%. We have 1 Cyberdex for the same reason you have Cyberdex in every deck.
you know why?
We talked a little bit about Marcus Batty, but is there anything you want to add to that?
Not really. I mean, he's just there because he's an added side game. He can trigger he's basically what I would normally slot Ash in for, right? And he's doing what and if Caprice misses, well, we got to back up. Might as well protect Caprice at all costs. So
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, and it's also fair to say if you can double stack these early because you have them, you can always use Marcus Batty on an end the run subroutine.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Very, very true.
All right, so we have Celebrity Gift. Celebrity Gift's a pretty good Jinteki card, I hear, because even if people know you're holding agendas, that doesn't mean that they can get to them.
Exactly. You're giving away information, and in exchange, you're getting a ton of credits. I think people sometimes get very skittish about playing this. If they have an agenda, I think you need to have some balls, and I think you need to play it and gain the 7 credits. Because I think when you're sitting with 30 credits and all your ice gets played, and it's all gonna, and you have the money to res them all, you're gonna feel way more comfortable showing them that agenda.
Right. Yeah, that's fair. We have Fast Track. So this is something I do want to talk about.
Cool.
It's a good card, obviously. I've used it to great effect in my Sync deck and also in my NEH deck. Yeah. What are you usually targeting with this? And how do you know when to pull the trigger on this?
So I mentioned before that we talked about more or less scoring windows, right? In versus decks like Dumble Fork, versus deck like Noise, it's super important that you get your scoring remote up as early as you can, and try to push through agendas before everything they have is set up. Basically, and before they even have a ton of money if possible. Basically, if you set up the ability to have a scoring window and they don't have all the resources necessary, you need to be pushing through an agenda at the earliest possible moment. Now, the negative is that when you're playing a Glacier deck, especially when you only run 8 agendas, you may not necessarily get the Nisei. You always want to try to score the Nisei as soon as possible. Nisei Mark II. So what Fast Track allows you to do is, let's say you have a scoring remote, so 2 to 3 pieces of ice probably, and a Caprice in the server, and you look at your board, the opponent's board, and you go, let's see, you got 12 credits, but no Faust is in play. And you don't have Adjusted Chronotype yet, but you got Wild Side. Okay. All right, let's roll some dice. Again, let's push through. Fast Track, grab the Nisei, install the Nisei, advance the Nisei. And just look at your opponent and go, your move. And see what happens. I mean, they're going to lose a click. Then they lose another click to play the Faust. So they're -1 card, -2 clicks. They're 2 clicks now. So they have to think to themselves, I'm going to make a run in the server. I'm going to lose valuable cards that I'm drawing to try to get in there. And then I play the sad game. Can I afford this? And that's really what you're playing towards. It also lets you, if you've already scored a Nisei and you don't have this card, seeing this later is actually pretty good because it means you can chain the Niseis, which is even better.
Right. And something you mentioned, we had Dean on the podcast recently, and he was talking about forks.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're talking about is setting up a fork where it's basically decide what's valuable, setting up your board state, or trying to threaten this agenda, and you've created a situation where either outcome is worse for your opponent than it is for you.
Right. If you sit there and wait, then I scored this Nisei, and the next Nisei is even harder. You come after it, well, now I definitely have a gaping window to score.
Right.
So, I love it.
Yep. And we got hedge funds for head funds.
Yep.
And we got an Interns. I have to imagine that this is prioritizing Marcus Batty and Caprice.
Yes. Occasionally versus Noise matchups, if they mill a Nisei, you'll Interns a Nisei as well. Okay. Think of it more of in those weird circumstances, think of it as the Fast Track for archives. You'll Interns Nisei, advance it, and keep it moving.
Yep. That makes sense. And we have Restructures because this is one of the few modern decks where you're probably going to get to 10 credits really fast.
Right. It's pretty easy. Structure's very, very good.
Yeah. So that's the basic deck. It's pretty lean. It's a pretty straightforward Glacier deck. It just takes some, I would say, as you mentioned, a lot of the skill is just being able to spot that scoring window and knowing when to, have a little, via con Dios and pull the trigger, right?
You got to go. I mean, you can sit there all day. You can sit there all day and say, I want to make sure I have 3 ice with Swordsman at the top and a Batty and a Caprice. And while that's optimal, sometimes you don't have those turns, man. If you're trying your hardest to have 2 ice on R&D, 1 ice on HQ, 3 ice on the remote, crick on archives, 2. I mean, you're probably not moving quite fast enough.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I've moved towards. I was a Glacier player for a long time. I actually moved towards NEH to kind of train myself to, drive a rocket ship with parts falling off of it.
Yeah.
Because that's what you have to do. You have to just keep running and work with what you have.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the way. I mean, number one, you get better at the game. Number two, the truth is that if you look at some of these great players, the phrase that my local group uses all the time is play your outs. Odds are grim. You have they have 20 cards left in the deck and only 2 agendas, and you can only access 1 card. Okay, so run an extra 1 card. You don't know.
Right.
You don't know. I mean, don't play stupid. Like make a calculated risk, but look at it. Say, all right, well, if I don't score this, I just lose the game anyway. All right, well, let's go. Let's see what we got. I mean, we might as well go for it now, because if I do score this, the game moves now more in my favor, where it's much harder for them to win. If I don't score this at all in the next couple of turns, the game is probably over here.
Right.
So.
And I'll give just a quick example of that. You should always do that. Like I was on 6 points at the store championship we had in Newark. My only loss with my NEH deck was against a gentleman who he was like, I should play this Maker's Eye, but you've put all your agendas at the bottom with DBS by now. And I was like, that's you. Yeah, I said that to him. I'm like, that's your out. Play it. And he played it, and he hit Global Food, BO, and won the game.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that would have put me on tilt, but you're right.
But I'm just like, that dems the brakes sometimes.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what happens.
Yeah,
and,
I mean, that is it.
Yeah. So, Hollis, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
And everybody at home, you can find Hollis on The Winning Agenda and Bad Publicity. Both of them have YouTube channels. I believe only The Winning Agenda is on iTunes, right?
Yes. Actually, I think In Our Bad Pub might be on iTunes now as well. I'll double check. But,
okay, I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Yeah, but you can find them online. Great stuff. Check them out if you haven't already. There's a lot of great content there. And stay tuned. We're going to take the deck for a spin on Jinteki.net and see how we do. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you all next time.
See you guys.